Hello and welcome to this podcast series created and hosted by IEECP, featuring cool project results. I'm Mary Connors, your host from the IEECP communication team. This series is part of IEECP's podcast hub, Energy in Your Ears. This new season was developed to celebrate the organisation's 10th anniversary, and over the course of 10 episodes, or perhaps more, we will hear about many of the topics IEECP works on, including housing inclusivity, local and regional climate and energy governance, building renovation, and one-stop shops to industrial efficiency and many more. In this episode, breaking down housing inequality, we discuss the 4A model of housing inclusivity developed by the HouseInc project. Today we are joined by Anne Kantel, a senior researcher at the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research in Karlsruhe, Germany. Anne is the project coordinator of the HouseInc project. Our second guest today is Raffaella Saporito, Associate Professor of Practice of Public Management at SDA Bocconi School of Management and a member of the HouseInc consortium. Finding affordable housing is a big challenge for many in Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, has made it a top priority, sharing her concern that people are struggling to find affordable housing. To help tackle this issue, Dan Jorgensen has stepped in as the new Commissioner for Energy and Housing. By advocating for equality and protecting the rights of minorities, Europe can build a fairer society where everyone has the chance to thrive and find a place to call home. The HouseInc project supports this new appointment and mission. It's crucial that everyone, including marginalised communities, has the chance to enjoy a good quality of life. This means making sure everyone has access to decent and affordable housing, along with energy and health services, digital connectivity, and reliable transport options. Hi Anne and Raffaella, welcome to this podcast episode. So Anne, can you tell us a bit about HouseInc and what are the main project goals?
Thank you. Great to be here. So HouseInc, or its full name, actually Inclusive, Affordable and Sustainable Housing for Marginalized Communities, is a research and innovation project by the European Commission under the Horizon program. And our team consists of 14 different partners across Europe, from universities and research institutes to policy think tanks and NGOs. And we all work together to empirically study causes and effects of housing inequality, and to then develop and scale up innovative solutions and policy recommendations that hopefully help prevent and mitigate inequality in housing. And as the name of the project suggests, we have a very specific focus on inclusive, affordable, and sustainable housing for marginalized communities, which means for us paying particular attention to at-risk factors, so factors that make people more or less vulnerable to housing deprivation. And it also means taking climate and sustainability challenges into consideration, kind of to focus on the sustainability part when assessing and addressing housing inequality in the project.
So how far along is the project?
We started in February 2024, and the project runs for a total of 3 years. So that means that we're have a bit more than half to go. And we're currently really in the midst of our deep dive into empirical collection and data analysis. In the end, the big objective is to provide evidence-based solutions and recommendations for local, national, EU-level policymakers to help address the severe housing crisis that many EU countries are currently facing.
And how does HouseInc approach the issue of housing inequality?
Well, one of the very exciting, but also, I would say, challenging aspects of the housing project is that we work together in a trans and interdisciplinary team. So this brings to the table a multitude of different skill sets and experiences, but also sometimes different understandings of what housing inequality is and how we can and should study it. So one of the first goals of the project was to conduct a very thorough review of the state-of-the-art literature, and then to develop a shared framework that allows us not only the space to include different perspectives and kind of the multiple different dimensions of housing inequality, but also seeks to put them into a conversation and integrate them to work for the same goal. And for the housing project, this goal is housing equality, which we understand as kind of inclusive access to quality housing that is defined through meeting basic human needs in the context of the ongoing sustainability challenges that I just mentioned. So very important for us, though, is that this definition does not suggest uniform housing conditions across Europe, across communities, but that housing inequality requires equitable access to housing, which is the inclusivity part of the definition, and that supports individuals and households' well-being within the context they are living in currently. And that is the quality housing part of the definition.
So, Raffaella, Anne spoke about the multidimensionality of the approach you were using to explain the different dimensions of housing inequality. How did you arrive at this model?
First of all, thank you for having me today, Mary, and hi, Anne. uh, one of the main reasons why defining housing inequality is a challenge is that it includes multiple dimensions at the same time. And as Anne just said, we have been working a lot on identifying in the literature both the causes of housing inequalities and their, let's say, manifestations, which is the way housing inequalities show up. So our goal was to bring together these different perspectives within a unique framework that was serving a dual purpose. In one end, it should help us make sense of housing inequality, and at the same time, it should be simple enough to inspire more inclusive housing policies and practices.
And you came up with the 4A's housing inclusivity model, looking at housing through the lenses of availability, affordability, accessibility, and acceptability. Could you break down what each of these A's really means?
Yes, sure, Mary. So let's start with the A of availability, which is about the actual number of housing units in a given area. Availability depends on many factors like urban planning, land use, and even newer trends such as short-term rentals, because all of these aspects have a strong impact on housing supply. So next we have affordability, which is probably the most, let's say, relevant in the current European public debate. And it looks at housing costs in relation to people's income. So we know there is a problem when housing expenses go beyond 40% of disposable income. So affordability depends not just on housing market dynamics, but also on salaries dynamics. Then there is accessibility, which is a core concept. We conceive accessibility not just as a physical accessibility, so critical for those people with disabilities, but also in terms of, let's say, physical proximity to service and opportunities, such as job opportunities or schools or hospitals. So if affordable houses are very far from working places, schools, hospitals, and so on and so forth, we are facing an issue of accessibility. And last but not least, acceptability, which considers whether housing solutions meets residents' needs. It is about the dignity of housing experience, but also the, let's say, coherence of housing solutions with cultural and social standards. Which means whether the housing experience feels adequate and appropriate. To give you an example, some types of shared living may help cut costs, but they may force families into overcrowded spaces where privacy and personal spaces are not always guaranteed.
And Anne, what are the implications of considering this framework?
I think there are at least two. So first, an integrated and trans and interdisciplinary research approach can hopefully provide a comprehensive understanding of housing inequality by addressing these multiple overlapping dimensions of inclusivity that Raffaella just outlined. And housing solutions then must consider these interacting dimensions, meaning that housing policies should be embedded within broader social policy and neighborhood development strategies rather than being treated in isolation. And second, our framework examines inequality from three key perspectives: causes, manifestations, and outcomes of housing inequality. And we hope that it helps that effective solutions can then be tailored to each of these different perspectives. So, to give you an example, political interventions can focus on addressing root causes of housing inequality. So, for example, political interventions can focus on addressing root causes, such as low wages, unemployment, or systemic discrimination, or they can mitigate the negative effects of housing inequalities. So, kind of address a different perspective, a different point in the system by, for example, offering programs to alleviate mental or physical health problems caused by housing inequality.
Raffaella, you were finalising a mapping activity of more than 200 housing solutions. Did you find consistency between these solutions and the 4A model?
Yes, Mary, we did. This mapping process helped us understand how different European countries have tried to balance environmental, economic, and social sustainability. These are dimensions that don't always align. From our analysis of over 200 cases, we see that reducing housing costs often supports environmental sustainability, showing a strong convergence between affordability and green solutions. However, when it comes to inclusion, the most effective approaches go beyond housing alone. Housing works best when it acts as an enabler with a broader social strategy. So it can support access to education, help migrants, asylum seekers settle in, or make it easier for people to enter the labor market. In short, for social inclusion, housing is just a piece of a puzzle of and broadening the notion of acceptability is a promising way to further investigations.
And finally, what's next for the HouseInc project?
We just launched a large multinational survey across 8 EU countries to assess housing inequality and its impacts on the population. And with this survey, we put a large focus on energy poverty and building energy efficiency renovations as one of the key challenges in inclusive and sustainable housing right now. One of many. So the survey results, as well as many other exciting findings, such as the atlas that is mapping innovative solution to housing inequality across Europe that Raffaella just mentioned, will be made available from the project throughout this year.
Thank you, Anne and Raffaella, for sharing your great insights on this important topic. It was very interesting to hear. So just a short recap, as we heard, housing inequality is complex and encompasses multiple dimensions. We heard about HouseInc's 4A's inclusivity model as a framework to understand and address the different dimensions of housing inclusivity. The discussion emphasized an integrated approach for solving housing inequalities, advocating for policies that consider the multiple aspects of the issue. You can learn more about HouseInc by visiting the project's page on IECP's website, www.iecp.org, and look for the project HouseInc on LinkedIn. You can find the links in the podcast description. Dig into our other podcasts, coming soon, a focus on industrial efficiency, and join us next time where we chat about one-stop shops and the Horace Project.